Hello again. Today I will be reading the chapter about bronze from 50 Minerals That Changed the Course of History. Although metallurgy began with the working of copper and gold, the metal that transformed civilization and set humanity on the road to ever more sophisticated technological developments was bronze. Bronze is not an element, it is an alloy of tin and copper, and its production necessitated the creation of large trading networks and the development of new technologies to cast and work metals. Although it was replaced by iron for tools and weapons in the first millennium BC, bronze remains to this day the preferred metal for casting sculptures. The next section is called the Third Age. According to the Greek poet Hesiod, who flourished in the 8th century BC, about the same time as the more famous Homer, the Bronze Age succeeded the far happier Gold and Silver Ages. Although there is no historical evidence for the first two ages, the term Bronze Age was adopted by archaeologists and historians to describe the period in human history when the primary technology, then the ultimate source of wealth and power, was bronze metallurgy. So it may not have been used to be pretty, but it was strong and made good weapons, and it was what you had if you were powerful and wealthy. Now the Bronze Age lasted from the end of the 4th millennium BC, so the 3000s, to the 1st millennium BC, so it lasted for all of the 2000s and all of the 1000s. More than 2,000 years this Bronze Age lasted. In most advanced areas of the world, including India and the Near East, bronze had been replaced by iron by the end of the 2nd millennium BC. So maybe not all of the 1000s. For Hesiod, the Bronze Age was a period of strife, means fighting, when humans were devoted to the god of war, Ares, or the Romans called him Mars. This description is borne out by the historical and archaeological record. The Bronze Age witnessed the rise of the first great imperial civilizations in Egypt, Mesopotamia, Syria, which is between the two of them, Anatolia, which is off to the side, Crete, Greece, India, and China. Bronze is not a metal found in nature, but it is an alloy consisting of around 90% copper and 10% tin. Now the earliest bronze didn't contain tin, but had arsenic, which is a neighbor of tin, to the top right of it in the periodic table. It's called arsenical bronze. However, arsenical bronze, although it's more pliable than tin bronze, you can work it more easily, it needs more hardening to have the same strength, with the added drawback that arsenic is toxic to those who work it. So they used tin instead. Bronze replaced copper and stone for tools and weapons because although it was more difficult to obtain its raw materials and to manufacture, it was stronger. It was easier to cast. That means to fill up a mold with the liquid metal of it and then have it sit. And it was more versatile. Bronze allowed the production of much more complex castings for statuary, musical instruments, and decorative objects, as well as new types of tools and weapons. Bronze was also stronger than the wrought iron tools and weapons of the early Iron Age, and it was not completely phased out until the introduction of steel. We'll get to that later. Another advantage of bronze over iron is that, like copper, it resists oxidation once a layer of green copper carbonate has sealed the surface of the metal. Iron, when it rusts, makes flakes, and the flakes, like a page of a book in wind, keep rising until all the iron is just dust. But copper doesn't do that. It gets a patina, verdigris, and then it's done. It's not going to oxidize anymore. One drawback about bronze is that tin and copper are rarely found together. Therefore, tin had to be imported over large distances to be alloyed with copper to make bronze. Remember, it's 90% copper, 10% tin. So you don't want to move a huge amount of copper when you can move a little amount of tin. The tin used in much of the Mediterranean world is thought to have come from the tin mines of Devon and Cornwall in southwest Britain, as well as from mines in northern Spain and northern France. Those places are all pretty close to each other, but they're pretty far from Greece and a lot of other places that actually use the tin. The tin used in the Near East and India was imported from Central Asia, places like Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan now. China and Southeast Asia had their own tin deposits. They were not connected to the rest of the world economy. This far-flung trade demanded the creation of extensive networks across the ancient world and established direct contact between completely different cultures. In other words, the manufacture of bronze triggered the first major phase of economic globalization. Seafarers from the eastern Mediterranean traveled to the British Isles, which were actually called the Tin Isles at the time. There were no Britons living there. There were people living there, but they weren't called Britons, or British people the way we would call them now. At that time, the British Isles were considered the ends of the earth, and tin was imported into the Near East and India along what would later become the Silk Road. I'm turning the page. In the later periods, so like the first millennium in BC, tin bronze was joined by a number of other bronze alloys, including aluminum bronze, manganese bronze, naval brass, and silicon bronze. So some of those have only come around the last couple hundred years. Now, silicon bronze takes advantage of that metal's resistance to corrosion and good electrical conductivity for a wide range of domestic, industrial, military, and maritime applications. Bronze remains the most popular material for cast metal sculptures, which are usually called bronzes. The Romans called bronze "eis Brundisium," after one of the major importation and production sites in the Roman Empire, the port of Brundisium. Makes sense? It's now called Brundisi, and it's on the Apulian coast of southern Italy. So, if you don't get a chance to go to Italy, and you should if you can, I haven't been there myself, but you should check out some of these historic sites. So, Brundisium, you can see how it got to the word bronze. Now, the imperial metal. Although it's impossible to reconstruct the political and social organization of the states and cities of the Neolithic period, from about 10,000 to 7,000 BC, because there are no written sources from that era, archaeologists have suggested these cultures might have been relatively democratic and egalitarian, with few social divisions based on gender, status, wealth, property, pretty equal. The large Neolithic city of Çatalhöyük in Turkey, for example, has no public buildings, no temples. Its citizens appear to have led a communal existence, sharing their resources equitably. But as we learned in the previous chapter, the beginning of the Metal Age, with the working of copper, which was again about 7,000 to 5,300 BC, it began a process of social stratification. People rose to the top or sank to the bottom. There didn't used to be so much of a top and bottom, except just based on your strength, which would change every generation. But now things can be passed down from generation to generation, which strength can't be. So it's going to make for a more permanent social order. Let's see here. This social stratification divided metallurgists along with a class of wealthy and powerful individuals who could afford to commission and buy metal artifacts from the rest of the population who continued to use stone tools. These trends became even more pronounced during the Bronze Age, which again was after the Copper Age. which witnessed the development of major imperial civilizations across the whole of the Old World, in Egypt, and right next door to them in Mesopotamia, Minoan Crete, out in the Mediterranean, kind of near Egypt and Mesopotamia, Mycenaean Greece, just a bit further away, Syria, which is between Mesopotamia and Egypt, Hittite Anatolia, which is between Syria and Crete, Elamite Iran, so Iran ruled by the Elamites, which is right next to Mesopotamia's Iran, Harappan India, and China. The only one that's not really like bordering the other ones is China. But with the Silk Road, they were able to get the materials and the know-how that they needed to. Now, all these cultures were highly centralized monarchies, ruled by kings who controlled the bulk of available resources. And they lavished those resources on the constructions of palaces, temples, monumental tombs. They concentrated their wealth into a few specific buildings. More than the control of gold or silver, their power and wealth depended on the control of the trade in tin, copper, and bronze, and the manufacture of bronze artifacts, the most important of which were weapons. And while copper had been suitable for axes, knives, chisels, arrowheads, the stronger and yet more pliable bronze allowed for the production of an entirely new weapon. Not an axe, not a knife, and not an arrow, it's the sword, which appeared across the world in that time in the Bronze Age, from Celtic Europe all the way to China. To counteract that sword came bronze armor, helmets, shields, which afforded much better protection to the warrior than like leather would, and it gave him a huge advantage over foes armed with Stone Age weapons. Another worldwide military development of the Bronze Age is the appearance of the chariot, after the earlier domestication of the horse in Central Asia. Together, the chariot and the sword transformed warfare. The greatest work of Greek epic poetry, Homer's Iliad, describes the conflict between two mighty Bronze Age powers, Mycenaean Greece and Troy. Mounted on their horse-drawn chariots, encased in their bronze armor, and fighting with bronze-tipped lances, like spears, or arrows and swords, Achilles, Hector, Paris, and Odysseus fought duel-like encounters on the battlefields of Troy. And of course, if you know the story at all, you know that Achilles was killed by Hector, but in the end, Hector and all of the others, including Paris and Troy, all of them lost, because Odysseus was a very wily fellow and got them to open up and destroy their gates with the Trojan horse. But that's another story. Now, the superpowers of this period, around 1000 BC, who were the Minoans, the Mycenaeans, Egyptians, Hittites, Phoenicians, Babylonians, Elamites, Harappans, and Chinese, they acquired extensive territories through their control of bronze technology and trade. And as they expanded, they came into conflict with each other. Centralization and international trade also brought about more peaceful developments, including the evolution of writing, which began in Egypt with hieroglyphs, in Mesopotamia with cuneiform, and in China with the early versions of Chinese characters found on oracle bones and bronze vessels. You didn't need writing just to record the mighty deeds of god-kings, but also for the more mundane purposes of keeping inventories and writing trading contracts. Another important economic function of bronze, although it wasn't widely used till the Bronze Age, is the use of the metal for the first types of coinage. The earliest bronze coins were made in China in the 10th century BC in the shape of cowrie shells, different kinds of shells, which earlier had been actual money themselves, the real literal shells. Later Chinese bronze coins were shaped like shovels, hoes, and knives, before they took the shape of round coinage we're familiar with today. You can see that picture there. They had the hole in the middle of the coin, the Chinese did, and sometimes still do, in order to have a string go through them. So you could have 100 coins with a string going through them, and wear like a necklace. Easier to count that way. So, bronze coinage was also minted in India in the 6th century BC, and in ancient Turkey and Greece, where it was used alongside electrum, gold, and silver coinage. Electrum is a mixture of gold and silver. And the last section today is the art of bronze. Bronze has played a significant role in the development of the arts, notably sculpture, of course, the decorative arts, and music. Among the earliest cast decorative pieces are the bronzes of China's Shang dynasty, which was around from about 1600 to about 1000 BC. Chinese bronzes included highly ornate vessels for food, water, and wine, and musical instruments, which were used for ritual purposes and were buried as grave goods. The idea being that later on, the person who was buried with those would be able to use them. Now, variations are on the few ancient Greek bronze statues have survived, but many are known from later Roman copies. Now, variations on the lost wax process are still used to produce bronze sculpture today. The ancient Chinese cast bronze zhong bells as ceremonial instruments, and in the Western world, the bronze alloy known as bell metal was favored for making church bells because of its resistance to corrosion and reverberation when it was struck. Bell metal has 78% copper, 22% tin, so a bit more tin than the usual bronze would. So here are some of the Chinese bells, and then you know what Western bells look like the Liberty Bell. Bronze, and its related alloy brass, has survived into the modern age, but the Bronze Age and the civilizations it created disappeared in a cataclysm known as the Bronze Age collapse, around 1200 BC. The mighty empires and kingdoms of the Eastern Mediterranean, Egypt, Syria, Mycenae, Cyprus, the Hittite Empire, and Babylonia, all of them were extinguished. The great trading networks that they had created to get tin and copper, they were gone. What happened? We don't really know. Europe entered its first dark age, not just Europe, but the Eastern Mediterranean, which according to archaeologists was a period far bleaker than the centuries following the collapse of the Roman Empire in Western Europe that we now call the Dark Ages, which really weren't so dark. When civilization arose once more in the Near East and Southern Europe, it would not be based on bronze, but on another metal, iron. Iron is not the next video in the series. We'll be looking at alabaster, which is quite white and not a metal, but a mineral. I hope you enjoyed this one. Bronze is a very important historical metal, and although we don't use it in weapons anymore, it certainly was used for that for thousands of years, and again is still used for things of beauty. So look around for bronze around your house. You'll probably not have to look too far before you see some. Thank you. Bye.